A coal miner's wife in West Virginia in 1954 fed 7 people on $9 a week. She kept a coffee can of bacon grease on the stove and a flour sack of cornmeal under the table. By Wednesday, the icebox was empty and supper still came together hot and on time. Number 19 on this list was the dish she cooked when payday was late. Number 14 cost 20 cents and fed all 7. Number 7 on this list cost nothing because the butcher gave the cut away. None of these suppers were banned by law. The supermarket aisles just replaced the pantry shelf, and the recipes never made it onto the page. These 25 suppers fed Black families through layoffs, late paychecks, and winters when the coal money ran short. Hit subscribe before this list ends. Here are the 25 forgotten African American suppers from the 1950s no one makes anymore. Number 25, liver and onions over rice. The butcher in any small Black neighborhood in 1955 sold beef liver for 15 cents a pound on Tuesdays after the weekend cuts had moved out the door. Your grandmother would slap 2 slices into a pan of bacon grease, salt and pepper them heavy, and cook a yellow onion down beside the meat until both went soft and dark like coffee grounds. She poured a thin gravy from the drippings, a teaspoon of flour stirred into the fat, water from the kettle on your stove. The whole supper went over rice that had cooked while she was at the ironing board. The kids who hated it ate it anyway because there was nothing else and because she would not be told what her own children would or would not finish. Liver was iron, and iron was what kept her standing through a double shift day after day. Your plate was clean by 7. Number 24, hoe cakes with cane syrup. A cast iron skillet on a wood stove in Hattiesburg, Mississippi in 1953, holding a 1/4 inch of bacon fat, 2 cups of yellow cornmeal, a pinch of salt, hot water from a tin kettle mixed with a wooden spoon until the batter could be dropped flat. 3 cakes at a time, the fat crackling around the edges like a wet match, the bottom going gold and crisp. The cane syrup came from a half-gallon jug bought at the country store for 50 cents and poured slow over the hot cake until it pooled like dark honey. A glass of buttermilk on the side. Your great uncle ate supper standing at the counter because the table was being used for a quilting frame. Cornmeal had crossed an ocean on a slave ship and ended up on a plate in your great-grandmother's brick row house. The skillet was older than the cook. Number 23, smothered cabbage with smoked turkey neck. A head of green cabbage cost a dime in 1956, and a smoked turkey neck cost less than a quarter. Your grandmother would simmer the neck in a heavy pot for an hour, lift it out, pull what little meat clung to the bone, and drop it back in the broth. She cut the cabbage into thick wedges, dropped them whole into the dark liquid like sails dropped into a harbor, covered the pot, and let it cook down for 40 minutes until the cabbage went translucent and the kitchen smelled like a smokehouse and a vegetable garden at once. A pinch of red pepper flakes if a man was eating, a piece of skillet cornbread to drag through the potlikker. What most people miss is the second pot. The pot fed 5 children and left enough liquor in the bottom to flavor your grandmother's pot of rice the next day. Nothing was tossed. Number 22, salmon croquettes with white sauce. The 15-ounce can of pink salmon at the corner grocery cost 49 cents in 1957, and your great aunt in Detroit could feed 4 people from 1 can. She drained it, picked out the soft round bones with her thumb, mashed the meat with a fork like pulling a thread, and stirred in a beaten egg, a half cup of cracker meal, a chopped onion, and a dash of black pepper. 6 round patties, fried in hot bacon grease until the outside went brown and crisp. While the patties drained on a brown paper bag, she made a white sauce from the drippings, 2 spoons of flour, and a tin of evaporated milk. The sauce went over your rice, the patties on top. The salmon was leftover Friday food in any white house. In a black house, it was a Tuesday supper that tasted like Sunday. Number 21, chicken feet stew. The poultry shop in any city with a black neighborhood sold chicken feet for 2 cents a piece in 1955 because no white grocer would put them on the shelf. Your great aunt would dunk a dozen feet in boiling water, peel the yellow scaly skin off in sheets like a sunburn, and clip the toenails with kitchen shears. She simmered the feet in a pot with a knob of fatback, a cut potato, a halved onion, and a handful of dried lima beans for 2 hours until the cartilage softened and the broth went thick and gelatinous like a French velouté. Served over rice with a spoon of pepper sauce. The feet were eaten with your fingers, the cartilage worked off the small bones, and the broth was sipped from your bowl. A working family ate a stew that tasted like a French restaurant for the price of a postage stamp. Number 20, hot water cornbread. A bowl of yellow cornmeal, a pinch of salt, a spoon of bacon grease, and boiling water from your kettle stirred in until the meal seized into a stiff dough. Your grandmother shaped it into ovals between her wet palms like clay and slid them into a skillet of hot lard. The outsides shattered when you bit them. The inside stayed soft as pudding. 3 minutes aside, lifted out onto a stack of newspaper, salted while still hissing like rain on a tin roof. Hot water cornbread was the supper of a woman who had 35 cents and 4 mouths and 40 minutes between her shift at the laundry and your children walking home from school. It was bread that needed no oven and no rising and no loaf pan. It was the technique of a kitchen that had to feed people fast and hot. Number 19, smothered pork chops with rice and gravy. A black widow in Birmingham, Alabama in 1954 worked as a housekeeper for a white family on the other side of the railroad tracks. She left her own house at 6 in the morning and got home at 7 at night, and on Tuesday evenings, the 4 children she was raising on her dead husband's veteran benefits got smothered pork chops because the corner butcher sold the thin shoulder cut for 39 cents a pound, half the price of the loin. She dredged the chops in seasoned flour, browned them in a black skillet hot enough to smoke, and set them aside on a plate. Into the same pan went a sliced yellow onion, 3 cloves of garlic minced fine, and the rest of the seasoned flour. She stirred the roux until it went the color of coffee and milk, poured in 2 cups of water from your kettle, and dropped the chops back in to simmer, covered for 35 minutes. While the meat went tender, she cooked a pot of long grain rice on the back burner. Her oldest girl set the table with a stack of biscuits left over from breakfast and a plate of sliced tomatoes from your porch garden. When the chops came out, the gravy was thick and dark like a slow river, full of onion, and it covered your rice like a brown blanket. Each child got 1 chop and a heaping spoon of rice. The gravy was for everything. The bread was for the gravy. The tomatoes were for the heat. She ate after the children were done, standing at the counter because her feet hurt and the chair was easier to mop around when it was empty. She went to bed at 9. She was up at 5. The recipe was in her hand and her mother's hand and her grandmother's hand, generation after generation, and none of them had ever written it down. It was the supper of a woman who could not afford to be tired and was tired anyway. Number 18, salt pork and butter beans. 3 slices of salt pork, scored with a knife on the rind side like a checkerboard, fried in a heavy pot until the fat rendered out and the meat went crisp. A pound of dried butter beans, soaked overnight in a mason jar of cold water, drained and dropped in. Water to cover by 2 inches. A halved onion, a bay leaf if your grandmother had one. The pot simmered on the back of the stove for 3 hours while she did your wash and iron shirts for the white family who paid her $7 a week. By 6, the beans had broken down into a creamy gravy like vanilla pudding. The salt pork was soft, and the kitchen smelled like a Sunday in the country. Served over rice with a slice of raw onion and a square of skillet cornbread. The pot fed 6 and gave a quart of leftovers for your children's lunch times the next morning. Number 17, oxtail with butter beans. The butcher at the corner store in 1956 cut the tail off the cow and threw it in a barrel with the bones because his white customers would not buy it. Your great uncle paid him 18 cents a pound. He browned the joints in a Dutch oven, lifted them out, and softened a chopped onion and a stalk of celery in the fat. The oxtails went back in with 2 quarts of water, a halved garlic head, a sprig of thyme from your back porch, and a pinch of red pepper. The pot cooked for 4 hours on the back of the wood stove, the kitchen filling with a meaty perfume that brought the neighbors to your back door. In the last hour, a quart of soaked butter beans went in to thicken the broth like wet sand. The meat fell off the bones in dark, wet ribbons. The marrow was sucked from the joints with a small spoon. The whole pot was poured over rice. A French chef in 1956 charged $5 for the same dish. Number 16, stewed tomatoes over toast. A quart mason jar of last summer's tomatoes, dumped into a saucepan with a knob of butter, a spoon of sugar, a pinch of salt, and a slice of yellow onion. The pan went on the front burner and bubbled while your grandmother sliced 4 pieces of day-old white bread and toasted them in the broiler of her gas stove. The toast went on a plate hot from the broiler. The stewed tomatoes were spooned over it until the bread soaked through like a sponge. Black pepper from a tin shaker, a glass of cold sweet milk on the side. The whole supper cost 12 cents and used a jar her own hands had put up in August. A child who ate it on a school night in 1954 was eating last summer's garden in February. That was a supper your working mother could put on the table in 8 minutes flat. Number 15, souse on saltines. A 2-pound block of head cheese called souse in the black neighborhoods of Philadelphia and Baltimore cost 35 cents in 1955 at the German butcher who sold to anyone with cash. Your grandfather would slice it a 1/4 inch thick onto a chipped saucer, lay each slice on a saltine cracker, and dab a splash of yellow mustard and a few drops of vinegar from a small bottle of hot sauce. He ate it standing at the kitchen counter after a shift at the bottling plant, washed down with a bottle of cold root beer. The souse was the trimmings of the hog set in its own gelatine like a stained glass window. It was protein for a working man at the price of a streetcar fare. It was the supper of a kitchen that had no time to cook and a wallet that had no room to waste. Number 14, neck bones and rice. A pound of pork neck bones cost 20 cents at the corner grocer in 1955, and that 20 cents fed 7 children. A young black mother in Memphis dropped them in a heavy pot of cold water with a halved yellow onion, a stalk of celery from your icebox, 3 smashed garlic cloves, a teaspoon of salt, and a generous pinch of black pepper. She brought the pot to a boil, skimmed the gray foam off the top with a slotted spoon, dropped the heat to a low simmer, and walked across the kitchen to start a pot of long grain rice on the second burner. The neck bones cooked for 2.5 hours until the meat slid off the bone in soft, dark threads like ribbons unrolled from a spool, and the broth went deep and rich. She lifted the bones out onto a platter, picked the meat off them with her fingers while the children watched from the doorway, and dropped the meat back into the broth. The rice came off the back burner steaming, and she ladled the meat and broth over it in shallow bowls, one for each child and one for herself. The bones went back into a mason jar with the leftover pot liquor for next day's pot of greens. The kitchen had a single light bulb hanging from a cord, and the table was a card table covered in a feed sack tablecloth, and 7 children ate a meat supper for less than 3 cents a head. The part that few people talk about is the Carrie. She had grown up in a sharecropper's cabin in the Mississippi Delta, and she had brought the recipe north on a Greyhound bus in 1947 with a cardboard suitcase and a Bible. She would die in 1989 in the same kitchen, and your cousin would cook neck bones and rice for her grandchildren in a condominium in Atlanta in 2014. The recipe carried itself. It needed no book. Number 13, chow chow over hot dogs. A pint mason jar of chow chow, the green tomato and cabbage relish that your grandmother put up in October, cost nothing because it was made from the garden trim. 2 cents worth of vinegar and pickling spice, put it in the jar. On a Wednesday in 1958, your great aunt boiled 4 cheap hot dogs in a saucepan, split them on a long bun, and topped each one with 2 heaping spoons of the yellow chow chow from the jar she had opened that morning. The relish was sweet and sharp and hot at the same time, and it made a 10-cent hot dog taste like something your tongue would remember for a week. A glass of iced tea brewed from a 5-cent box. The supper hit the table in 6 minutes, and a child who had been working a paper route since dawn ate 3 of them, one after another, and asked for a 4th. Number 12, fried bologna sandwich. The grocer at the corner of Beale Street in Memphis in 1956 sliced a half pound of red rind bologna for 20 cents and wrapped it in butcher paper. Your grandmother would lay a slice in a hot, dry skillet, listen for the cup-shaped curl as the edges shrank like tin foil in a fire, and flip it once to brown the underside. The slice went on a piece of soft white bread spread with yellow mustard and a smear of mayonnaise from a small jar she kept in your icebox, a leaf of lettuce from your porch box, a slice of tomato in summer. The sandwich was a quarter, not a meal, but a working man could eat 2 of them with a glass of buttermilk and call it supper. The bologna fried up sweet and salty at the same time. Your grandfather called it the poor man's steak. He was not wrong. Number 11, hominy and ham hocks. A bag of dried hominy, the soaked field corn that had been treated with lye until the hulls slipped off like husks, cost 15 cents at any feed and seed in the South in 1955. Your grandmother soaked a cup of hominy in cold water from sunup, drained it at noon, and dropped it in a heavy pot with 2 smoked ham hocks and 4 cups of water. The pot simmered for 3 hours on a low fire while she did your wash on the back porch. The hominy bloomed into white plump kernels like popcorn in slow motion. The ham hocks fell apart and salted the broth. The whole pot was poured over crumbled cornbread in shallow bowls and eaten with a spoon. A hot pepper from your windowsill jar gave it heat. A child who came in from playing kickball ate 2 bowls and slept hard. Number 10, calf liver with onions and gravy. Calf liver was 25 cents a pound in 1957, half the price of beef liver because the city housewives turned their nose up at it. Your grandmother bought a pound on Friday for Sunday, Wednesday supper. She rinsed it under cold water, patted it dry on a flour sack towel, dredged the slices in seasoned flour, and laid them in a skillet of hot bacon grease. 3 minutes aside, no more, or it would go tough as shoe leather. While the liver rested on a plate, she fried 2 sliced yellow onions in the same pan until they went sweet and brown like caramel, sprinkled in a spoon of flour, and added a half cup of milk to make a pan gravy. She poured the gravy and onions back over the liver and served it on top of mashed potatoes that had been waiting on the back burner. A child who hated liver ate it because the gravy was good and because your grandmother said so. Number 9, fish and grits. A Friday supper in any black household from Charleston to Chicago in 1955. Your great-grandfather walked down to the dock or the corner fish market and brought home a string of small whiting or croaker for 50 cents. Your great-grandmother dredged them whole in seasoned cornmeal, fried them in a deep pool of hot lard until the bones went crisp enough to eat like potato chips, and laid them on a brown paper bag to drain. While the fish fried, a pot of stone ground grits cooked low and slow on the back burner with a pat of butter and a heavy pinch of salt. The grits went on your plate first, the fish on top, a wedge of lemon, a dash of hot sauce from a small bottle she had carried up from her mother's pantry in Georgia. The supper said it was Friday, and it said your rent had been paid, and it said tomorrow there would be enough. Number 8, sardines on saltines with hot sauce. A flat tin of sardines packed in mustard cost a dime at any corner store in 1956. Your grandfather would crack it open on the kitchen counter, lay the 4 oily fish out on a saucer like soldiers in a row, and stack saltines next to them on a small plate. Each cracker got a fish, a dab of the mustard sauce from the tin, and 3 drops of hot pepper sauce from a bottle on your table. He ate it with a paring knife, and his fingers sitting on your back step in his shirt sleeves while the radio played the late innings of a Birmingham Black Barons game. A bottle of cold beer from your icebox. The supper was a dime, and it was protein, and it was 20 minutes of sitting still after a 14-hour day. He would say it was the best 10 cents a man could spend. Number 7, smothered chicken wings. The corner butcher gave the wings away in 1955. He was paid for the breasts and the thighs by the white housewives, and the wings sat in a barrel under the counter until somebody black asked for them. Your grandmother would walk in on Saturday morning and take a bag of 15 wings home for nothing. She trimmed the tips off, dredged the rest in flour, seasoned heavy with paprika and black pepper, and browned them in a black skillet of hot lard. She lifted them out, fried a chopped onion and a green bell pepper in the drippings, sprinkled in flour for a dark roux, poured in a quart of water from your kettle, and dropped the wings back in to simmer for 40 minutes covered. The kitchen filled with a smell that pulled the neighbors halfway across the alley like a tractor pulling a load. The wings came out sticky and dark, the gravy thick enough to coat a spoon, served over rice. The supper that cost $0 fed 5 children and a husband and left enough gravy to drag your bread through. Number 6, pinto beans with ham hock and cornbread. A pound of dry pinto beans cost 12 cents at the grocer in 1956. A smoked ham hock was a quarter. Your grandmother soaked the beans in cold water overnight in a mason jar, drained them in the morning, and dropped them in her heaviest iron pot with the hock, a halved onion, 3 garlic cloves, and a teaspoon of salt. The pot simmered low all day on the back of your stove while she scrubbed floors at a hospital across town. By the time she got home at 6, the beans had broken down into a thick brown potlikker like a slow tide, the ham hock had fallen apart in the broth, and the kitchen smelled like every black kitchen in America. A wedge of hot skillet cornbread went on the side, broken into your bowl, and a sliced onion and a pickled pepper sat on your table. What most people miss is the rhythm. A pot of pintos and cornbread was the supper that built a generation. Number 5, rice and gravy. A spoon of bacon grease in a hot skillet, a heaping spoon of flour, stirred in until it went the color of pecan shells, salt and pepper, and 2 cups of water from your kettle whisked in slow. The roux gravy bubbled and thickened in 3 minutes, flat like a pond freezing over. Poured over a heaping bowl of long grain rice with whatever leftover meat was in your icebox. a fragment of fried chicken, a hunk of pot roast, a piece of smoked sausage. On the nights when there was no meat at all, the gravy went over rice alone with a fried egg on top. A child who came home from school in 1957 to a bowl of rice and gravy ate without complaint because the gravy was hot and there was butter on your bread, and the next day there would be something else. That was the kitchen of a working woman. Number 4, tomato gravy over biscuits, a summer supper from the kitchen of a black sharecropper's wife in eastern Arkansas in 1955. 3 ripe tomatoes from your porch garden, peeled and chopped, dropped into a skillet of hot bacon grease with a pinch of salt, a pinch of sugar, and a sliced yellow onion. The mixture cooked down for 15 minutes into a thick red gravy like a sunset stewed down, and a spoon of flour was whisked in for body. While the gravy bubbled, she rolled out a half batch of biscuit dough, cut it with the rim of a tin cup, and baked the rounds in a wood-fired oven for 10 minutes. She split the hot biscuits open, ladled the tomato gravy over the buttered halves, and served it with a glass of cold buttermilk. A supper made of a garden and a flour sack, the kind of meal your great-aunt could put together with a tired back and a quiet kitchen. Number 3, cornbread crumbled in buttermilk. Your great-grandfather would take a square of yesterday's skillet cornbread, break it into chunks in a tall glass, pour cold buttermilk over the top until the bread floated like driftwood, and eat it with a long spoon on your back porch in the heat of a Mississippi August. The cornbread soaked up the tang. The buttermilk softened the crust. He sliced a green onion onto the top in 3 coins and added a pinch of salt. The supper cost nothing because the bread was left over and the buttermilk was the dregs of the morning churn. It was the supper of a man who had been picking cotton since 5 and would be in your bed by 9. It was older than the recipe books and older than the radio. The first enslaved Africans on the rice coast of South Carolina ate a version of it. It was still on your porch in 1959. Number 2, Sunday leftover hash. A black grandmother in St. Louis in 1956 cooked Sunday dinner for 14 people, and Monday's supper was made from what came home in foil. She chopped the leftover roast pork into a 1/4-inch dice, diced 2 cold boiled potatoes from the same dinner, and shaved the last of a yellow onion. Everything went into a hot skillet with a spoon of bacon grease. She pressed the hash flat with the back of a spatula and let it sit on the heat for 6 minutes without stirring until the bottom went brown and crusty like a sheet of fried lace. She flipped it once. A poached egg went on top of each plate. A glass of cold sweet milk. Your Monday supper was the Sunday supper recooked, and it was better the second time. Nothing went in the trash. The Sunday roast paid for itself twice. Number 1, beans and cornbread. The everyday 2-pot supper of every black household from Mississippi to Michigan in the 1950s. A pot of beans on your back burner, a pan of cornbread in your oven. The beans were whatever was in your cupboard. Pintos most nights, navy on Tuesdays, black-eyed on Fridays, butter on Sundays, soaked overnight, simmered with a piece of smoked meat, salted at the end. The cornbread was a cup of yellow meal, a half cup of flour, a spoon of sugar, a teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, an egg, a cup of buttermilk, and a 1/4 cup of bacon grease. Mixed in a bowl with a wooden spoon and poured into a hot iron skillet that had been heating in your oven. 25 minutes. The pot of beans and the pan of cornbread cost a quarter together and fed a family of 7. It was supper Monday and supper Thursday, week after week. It was the foundation under every other meal on this list. A child who grew up on it had a backbone like a hickory branch. A grandmother who could cook it could feed anyone who walked through your door. Chitlin loaf took the tradition of chitlins and transformed them into something convenient for church fellowship tables. After chitlins were thoroughly cleaned and boiled tender, they were chopped fine and mixed with cornmeal, eggs, onions, and seasoning to form a loaf. Baked until firm and sliced thick, it could be served at room temperature, perfect for potluck, tables where dishes needed to hold up. Church mothers who made chitlin loaf were respected for their patience, as preparing chitlins required hours of careful work. The dish appeared at watch night services when traditional foods held deep significance. For many, it represented preserving ancestral foodways and honoring traditions even when shortcuts tempted. Chitlin loaf was heritage shaped into slices, served with pride where memory and faith gathered together.
Peach cobbler with hand-rolled crust arrived at church suppers in rectangular pans, golden pastry bubbling with fruit juices that caramelized at edges while centers stayed tender. Fresh peaches were sliced during summer when abundant and cheap, tossed with sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and lemon juice before being covered with pastry dough rolled thin. The cobbler baked slowly until crust turned golden and peach filling thickened into syrup pooling in corners, creating bites ranging from crispy edges to fruit-soaked centers. Churchwomen made these in home kitchens early Sunday morning, timing baking so dessert was slightly warm when served. Peaches in season cost little at roadside stands, with bruised fruit perfect since it would be cooked down anyway. The dish represented summer abundance and preserving seasonal fruit, with families often canning peaches for year-round cobblers. Children lined up eagerly, hoping for corner pieces with extra crust, while adults savored the combination that tasted like celebration. Bones and rice appeared at black church Christmas dinners as proof that the most flavorful cuts were often the ones others overlooked. Pork neck bones were cheap and considered undesirable by many, but church mothers understood that bones meant marrow, and marrow meant richness. The neck bones were first browned in a heavy pot, then simmered for hours with onions, garlic, and seasoning until the meat fell from the bones and the broth turned silky from rendered collagen. Rice was cooked in that same broth, absorbing every drop of the smoky, porky flavor until each grain glistened with richness. The dish was served in deep bowls, the tender meat piled over rice with plenty of potlikker for sopping with cornbread. Children learned to navigate around bones, sucking out every bit of marrow and meat their elders had taught them to value. Neck bones and rice represented the ingenuity of black cooks who turned what others discarded into dishes that satisfied both body and soul during the leanest times.
Smothered oxtails with rice announced itself the moment you stepped into the fellowship hall, its rich aroma filling every corner with promise. Church mothers braised these bony cuts for hours in cast iron Dutch ovens, transforming what butchers discarded into something magnificent. The oxtails were seared until browned, then slow cooked with onions, garlic, and thick tomato-based gravy seasoned with bay leaves and thyme until meat surrendered from bone. Marrow melted into the sauce, creating unmatched richness. Served over white rice that soaked up that velvety gravy, this dish fed dozens at church anniversaries and pastoral appreciation dinners. It represented elevating humble ingredients into celebrations, proving patience and skill could transform the forgotten into the unforgettable.
Neck bones and rice transformed what butchers considered scraps into rich, satisfying meals with minimal expense and maximum flavor. Pork neck bones were browned in large pots until caramelized, then simmered for hours with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until meat fell from bone. White rice served as bed for tender meat and thick gravy, providing complete nutrition. Church mothers understood neck bones required patience and proper seasoning, transforming tough cuts through slow cooking. These bones cost almost nothing at black-owned butcher shops, making them perfect for feeding crowds on limited budgets. The dish appeared at weeknight suppers and revival meetings, where its hearty nature sustained people through hours of worship. Children learned that good food did not require expensive ingredients, just knowledge, time, and care. Neck bones and rice represented resourcefulness, allowing Black communities to thrive despite economic challenges, proving dignity and deliciousness could emerge from what others discarded. Gula red molasses spice cookies filled kitchens with the warm scent of cinnamon, ginger, and cloves long before guests knocked on the door. Dark molasses gave each cookie a deep sweetness and a chewy texture that stayed tender for days, making them ideal for storing in tins or carrying to church gatherings. Butter and brown sugar blended with the spices created a dough that chilled briefly before baking into perfectly cracked tops, dusted with a light coating of sugar. Each bite offered a comforting balance of sweet heat and earthy richness, the kind of flavor that paired perfectly with a glass of milk or a steaming cup of coffee. Children eagerly rolled the dough into small balls while parents handled the hot baking sheets, turning cookie making into a family ritual. Whether stacked on holiday plates or tucked into lunch pails, molasses spice cookies traveled well and satisfied even the strongest sweet craving. They became a year-round favorite for families who cherished recipes that felt both festive and familiar, proving that the simplest ingredients could create an aroma and taste that lingered lovingly in memory long after the last crumb disappeared from the jar.
Pig feet and sauerkraut brought together African American cooking traditions with influences from German immigrants throughout the South. Church mothers cleaned and split pig feet, then simmered them slowly until collagen broke down into gelatinous, silky texture. Sauerkraut was added during final hours, its tangy sharpness cutting through the richness of pork and creating unexpected balance. The finished dish was tender, slightly sour, deeply satisfying, served with cornbread to soak up flavorful liquid. It appeared at church suppers during winter months when heartier fare sustained the congregation through cold evenings. Though some modern palates might hesitate, those who grew up with pig feet and sauerkraut remember it fondly as a dish that filled bellies and connected communities across cultural lines.
Buttermilk cornbread from scratch emerged from church ovens in cast-iron skillets seasoned through decades, creating golden rounds with crispy bottoms and tender crumbs that soaked up Potlikker perfectly. Stone-ground cornmeal was mixed with buttermilk, eggs, flour, baking powder, and salt before being poured into smoking hot skillets greased with bacon drippings that created the signature crust. The result tasted nothing like store-bought varieties, with slight tang from buttermilk and richness from drippings. Churchwomen competed quietly over whose cornbread achieved perfect texture, not too dry and not too cake-like, but substantial enough to fill stomachs and complement every dish. Cornmeal was among the cheapest staples available, with 5-pound bags costing less than $1. The bread appeared at every gathering, from Wednesday fellowship to all-day singing, where stacks disappeared as quickly as they were baked. Children reached for corner pieces with extra crust, while adults appreciated how the bread stretched meals. Lemon turkey legs turned ordinary afternoons into feasts that stretched across lawns and porches. Large turkey legs were rubbed with salt, black pepper, and a hint of paprika before spending hours in a slow smoker where hickory or oak wood filled the air with a deep, savory perfume. The meat cooked until it nearly fell from the bone, yet held enough bite to satisfy anyone who grabbed it by the handle and tore off a juicy piece. This portable meal was ideal for church picnics, outdoor fairs, or family reunions where plates were optional and conversation never paused. Children marveled at the size of each leg while adults admired the rich mahogany skin that crackled under gentle pressure. No one left hungry when a basket of smoked turkey legs appeared, and leftovers rarely survived the walk home. Their flavor spoke of patience, resourcefulness, and the simple art of turning inexpensive cuts into something grand, proving that the best meals often needed nothing more than smoke, time, and a crowd ready to gather and share the moment together in the open air.
Chicken and cornmeal dumplings stretched one bird to feed an entire congregation when times were lean but faith remained strong. Church mothers simmered a whole chicken until meat fell from bones, creating rich golden broth fragrant with celery, onion, and bay leaf. Cornmeal dumplings were mixed by hand, combining cornmeal with flour, baking powder, and lard, then dropped by spoonfuls into bubbling broth. As they cooked, dumplings swelled and absorbed the chicken essence, becoming soft pillows floating in savory liquid. The dish was ladled into bowls at homecomings, repasts, and revival week suppers. This represented resourcefulness and community, showing how one chicken could become a feast through skilled hands and generous spirits willing to share whatever they had.
Candied yams with marshmallows crowned every church supper table, baked in aluminum pans that mothers carried from home kitchens to fellowship halls. Sweet potatoes were peeled and sliced thick, layered with brown sugar, butter, cinnamon, and nutmeg before being blanketed with miniature marshmallows that turned golden under heat. The result tasted like comfort itself, with tender yams swimming in caramelized syrup and marshmallows creating a toasted crust children fought over. These appeared at Easter dinners and revival suppers, essential beside ham and greens. Sweet potatoes cost pennies per pound and lasted weeks in pantries, making them economical for feeding crowds. Church mothers competed quietly over whose yams achieved perfect balance, with recipes passed through families and guarded like secrets. The dish represented abundance even during lean times, proving humble ingredients transformed with love could create joy. 7 cobbler with pie crust strips was the kind of dessert that reminded people what home felt like. You could smell it before you even made it through the church door, that mix of cinnamon, butter, and baked peaches rising through the air like a sweet hymn. Someone's grandmother had brought it from home, wrapped tight in foil and tucked safely in the trunk of her car, so it would still be warm when service ended. The peaches were always ripe, soft from syrup or from the summer heat, and they melted into the crust like gold under sunlight. The pie strips were laid carefully across the top, never in perfect lines but always with love, brushed with melted butter until they baked into crisp ribbons that cracked softly with every scoop. A bowl of peach cobbler was more than dessert. It was reward for long sermons, for tired weeks, for the kind of patience that came from faith and family. The sweetness clung to your tongue and made every bite feel earned. No matter how many tables were filled with cakes or puddings, this one was always gone first. The elders called it real dessert, and the children licked their spoons clean, knowing this was what happiness tasted like.
Neck bones and butter beans filled fellowship halls with comfort only slow-cooked food could provide. Church mothers simmered smoked pork neck bones for hours until meat became tender enough to fall apart at the touch of a fork. Butter beans absorbed the smoky, salty essence of pork as they cooked down into creamy softness. The broth turned silky, seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and onion. This dish appeared at Wednesday night suppers and special fellowship gatherings when something hearty was needed. It stretched inexpensive cuts into meals, satisfying both body and spirit, providing complete protein and warmth. Though rarely seen on modern tables, neck bones and butter beans proved that church kitchens could transform scarcity into abundance through faith and patience.
Black-eyed peas with ham hocks simmered in church kitchens year-round but held special significance on New Year's Day, when congregations gathered to eat them for luck and prosperity. Dried peas were soaked overnight, then cooked slowly with a single ham hock that released smoky, salty flavor, while onions and garlic added depth. The result was creamy beans in thick pot liquor served as soup or over rice, with ham hocks meat pulled from bone. Churchwomen understood a little meat went far when combined with beans, providing protein without the expense of steaks beyond most budgets. Black-eyed peas cost almost nothing, with dried bags available for pennies, perfect for feeding large crowds after Sunday service. The dish carried deep cultural significance, connecting congregations to Southern agricultural traditions and New Year's customs promising good fortune. Children ate them without complaint because Potlikker's richness made beans taste special, while adults appreciated both nutrition and continuity with tradition. Baked in aluminum pans that mothers carried from home kitchens to fellowship halls. Sweet potatoes were peeled and sliced thick, layered with brown sugar, butter, cinnamon, and nutmeg before being blanketed with miniature marshmallows that turned golden under heat. The result tasted like comfort itself, with tender yams swimming in caramelized syrup and marshmallows creating a toasted crust children fought over. These appeared at Easter dinners and revival suppers, essential beside ham and greens. Sweet potatoes cost pennies per pound and lasted weeks in pantries, making them economical for feeding crowds. Church mothers competed quietly over whose yams achieved perfect balance, with recipes passed through families and guarded like secrets. The dish represented abundance even during lean times, proving humble ingredients transformed with love could create joy.
Smothered cabbage with ham hocks turned simple ingredients into something the entire congregation looked forward to all week. Church mothers simmered ham hocks until meat became tender and broth turned rich with smoky flavor. Cabbage was added in wedges, cooking down slowly until it absorbed pork essence while maintaining slight bite. Seasoned with black pepper, sugar to balance bitterness, and sometimes red pepper flakes, the dish was humble yet satisfying. Served alongside cornbread at Wednesday night. Suppers, smothered cabbage, provided nutrition and comfort while stretching modest ingredients. The dish represented generations of knowledge about coaxing maximum flavor from minimal resources. Though cabbage remains common, this slow-cooked preparation has largely disappeared, replaced by quicker methods.
Gula red rice with sausage carried Carolina Low Country traditions into fellowship halls, a dish with roots in West African jollof rice seasoned through generations. Long grain rice was sautéed in bacon drippings with onions, bell peppers, and garlic before crushed tomatoes transformed the mixture into something rich and red, with smoked sausage adding protein. The rice absorbed every bit of flavor as it simmered, turning tender with each grain coated in tomato-rich seasoning. Church women from coastal regions brought this proudly, knowing it represented cultural heritage connecting congregations to ancestors who never forgot their origins. Rice was inexpensive and fed dozens when stretched with vegetables and meat, making it practical for church budgets. The tomatoes added vitamins while sausage provided richness to satisfy working people arriving hungry. Gula red rice appeared at Wednesday suppers and Sunday dinners, signaling someone understood honoring traditions while feeding community. Wild plum chutney stew with vegetables turned what butchers once gave away into luxury dishes saved for special occasions. Oxtails were browned in large pots until caramelized, then simmered for hours with onions, carrots, celery, tomatoes, and herbs until meat became fall-apart tender and bones released gelatin into rich, thick broth. The result was deeply flavorful stew that tasted expensive despite costing almost nothing. Church women understood oxtails required patience and long cooking, teaching younger cooks the value of slow preparation. The bones cost pennies per pound at Black-owned butcher shops. The stew stretched small amounts of meat to feed large crowds, with vegetables adding bulk and nutrition, while gelatinous broth created satisfaction. Oxtail stew appeared at anniversary dinners and homecoming celebrations, signaling this was meal worth attending. The dish proved that proper technique could transform what others discarded into something genuinely special.
The 1950s African-American supper table was a working kitchen run by a woman on her feet since before sunup. By the 1970s, the corner butcher who sold the cheap cuts had been replaced by a chain grocery that did not stock chicken feet or oxtails. By the 1990s, the can of pink salmon and the bag of pinto beans had been pushed aside by frozen entrees and drive-through windows. The recipes never died. They just stopped being cooked on a Wednesday. Cook one this week, set the pot on a low fire, pour the gravy over the rice. Tell me in the comments which one your grandmother made on a weeknight in 1955 and what city her kitchen sat in. The plate is still warm.